So having covered fluid basics in the ANS, it's time to move on to our first real topic of the semester. That's hematology. Hemo, root word means blood, ology, the study of. Hematology is the study of the blood. Those of you who are serial killers probably familiar with people leaving bloody handprints on the wall. Nice touch is to make a little heart in the middle of it that gives the crime investigators something to look forward to. And people also leaving help written on the wall. Okay, what's blood made of? Blood is a fluid connective tissue. Remember connective tissue. Connective tissue, bones, ligaments, cartilage, and so on, adipose. Blood is the only fluid connective tissue. It's made of 55% of plasma, which is the watery part of the blood. Formed elements make up 45%. Formed elements are the chunks, not the solutes. Don't mix this up with solutes. Solutes are dissolved. They're not formed elements. Formed elements are actual chunks. They stick out. Those include erythrocytes, root word erythro, red, cyte cells. These are the red cells, the red blood cells. Their job, you know how people say you had one job. One job of the erythrocytes is to carry oxygen. That's really the only main thing that they do. They also contribute to viscosity, but their main job, by far, is to carry oxygen. Leukocytes, root word means white, cyte cells. So these are the white cells, white blood cells. What's their main job? Fight infection. And then platelets, sometimes they're called thrombocytes. Thrombocytes are complete cells, and humans don't have them, like dogs and cats do, but humans don't. Platelets are cell fragments. So you will see some sources talk about human thrombocytes. That's technically not really right. They're just chunks of thrombocytes called platelets. And what's their job? To clot the blood, okay? So you can see the pictures here, the slide of blood in the lower left. That's mostly red blood cells. The big purple things are white blood cells. And see those little tiny dots? Those are the platelets, all right? And, on the right side of the illustration, you can see as well. Red blood cells, white blood cells are the biggest of all. They're bigger than the red blood cells, and platelets are little tiny things. This is a great review slide. There is a lot of stuff in your blood, and you have to know all of it. This is a good slide to go back and check every once in a while, make sure you really are learning all the things that are in your blood. So hematocrit, abbreviated HCT, this is the percent of blood volume that is composed of red blood cells. So we talked then, we have the formed elements, all right. Of the formed elements, some of them are red blood cells. What should that be? It should be about 47% plus or minus 5 for males, 42% plus or minus 5 for females. So if you average those two together, that's 45%. So the standard number given in all the books for hematocrit is 45%. But remember, for males, it's normal for it to be anywhere between basically 42 and 52. For females, normal to be anywhere from 37 to 47. So there can be a lot of variation. 45% is sort of like the average normal value, all right? Plasma, then the watery part of the blood, it's often called straw-colored, basically piss-colored. It's kind of a lightish yellow. Why? Why isn't it clear like water? The answer is because of all the solutes. It's got lots of stuff dissolved in it, and that makes it not clear, okay? 55% of whole blood with many dissolved substances. Many, and you're going to have to know a lot of them, by the way. So once again, blood, 45% formed elements, which is the hematocrit. Hematocrit is really just the red blood cells. Plasma, 55% the water. Now, wait a minute. If formed elements are 45% and the hematocrit is 45%, what the hell happened to the white blood cells? That's the buffy coat. White blood cells and platelets form, if you take a tube of blood, those of you who are serial killers are familiar with this, I'm sure, you put it in a centrifuge, you spin it down, all the red blood cells will end up down at the bottom. Plasma will end up at the top. And then there will be a little thin layer called the buffy coat. And that's less than 1% of whole blood. Now here's a little puzzle. Remember in Bio 202, a lot of times we want you to figure things out. So what I'm going to tell you is your body makes whole bunches of white blood cells. So if it makes whole bunches of them, why are they less than 1% of a tube of centrifuged blood? I want you to think about that. So how do you get blood out of somebody? Well, there are a lot of ways, but generally speaking, medically, we want to kind of control it. So venipuncture means you puncture a vein. Walls of veins are thinner, and also the blood pressure is lower in veins than in arteries. So that's the normal way they get it, because, the blood is just going to trickle out, even if you make a mistake, okay? They have the nice vacuum tubes now that they use when you go to the doctor and you need the blood withdrawn, all right? So venipuncture is the typical one. The phlebotomists generally are going to use that. Arterial puncture. Now, this is going into an artery, and normally the reason for getting an arterial puncture is if you need to know blood gases and pH. Now, who does that normally? Yeah, the respiratory therapist. It's kind of funny because sometimes you'll hear people say, well, no, I want the doctor to do it. No, you don't, you dumbass. The respiratory therapist has done it like 5 million times. The doctor does it like once a month at the most. The respiratory therapist is much more adept at doing a puncture. So for God's sakes, let the respiratory therapist do it, okay? Capillary sticks, this is what, like diabetics have in order to get a quick measure of your blood sugar. Prick the finger or the earlobe, the heel. Readings on glucose, but it can also be used for other things. Like rangers at Grand Canyon National Park have little capillary sticks, but they're for sodium. One of the main causes of medical distress at the Grand Canyon is actually not dehydration. It's something called hyponatremia, which you should be able to figure out. It means not having enough sodium in your blood. And what they do is the rangers use the little capillary sticks to see how much sodium people have got. If their sodium is normal, then they give them water. If their sodium is low, then they actually give them like crackers and pretzels and things like that to bring their sodium back up. So the main way to get blood again is the venipuncture. That's the usual way it's done. All right, physical characteristics and the volume of blood. I can't believe it's not blood. Yeah, all right, let's make you go away. Okay, so sticky, opaque, viscous fluid with a metallic taste. Every one of those is important, and you should know why. Why is it sticky? Because it's got a lot of glucose in it. Opaque, what does that mean? You can't see through it. Why can't you see through it? Well, because of all the damn red blood cells, and the solutes to some extent as well. Viscous, what does that mean? Viscosity. That's the thickness. Like on motor oil, 30 weight, 40 weight, so on. That's viscosity. Why is blood viscous? Because of all the solutes and mostly because of the red blood cells. Blood is thicker than water, all right? And it has a metallic taste. I was on the boxing team in college, and, I got punched in the nose a lot. And one of my main memories from my boxing matches is just the sensation of metal in the back of my throat. Because all the blood getting punched in the nose, blood drains down my throat, and it has a very metallic taste. Why? Why does it have a metallic taste? Yeah, from the iron. Blood is high in iron, and we'll see exactly why. You may already know. We'll see in case you don't. It's scarlet, normally. That's when it's oxygen rich. It's dark red when it's oxygen poor. So venous blood is normally dark red. Arterial blood is the bright red. Most of you have probably never seen arterial blood. Even in really bad cuts and injuries and stuff like that, you're mostly seeing venous blood. If you cut an artery, you'll know, because blood will actually be squirting out of the artery. It will be spraying out. I took a forensic crime class one time, and we got to see some crime scene photos. I saw one where a woman had slit her husband's throat, and he had fought back for about 20 or 30 seconds. And blood was actually covering the walls and even the ceiling. The blood comes out of the arteries with such force it was sprayed on the walls and the ceiling. All right, so you generally know if you've hit an artery. Blood is slightly alkaline, basic. In chemistry called acid base. In physiology, we don't use the word basic because you would never know if you mean basic like acid base or basic like simple. So we say alkaline. Blood has a pH of 7.35 to 7.45. As you may remember from Bio 156 and from nowhere else. And you should from actually Bio 201 as well. Normal pH is 7. Water has pH of 7. Below 7 is acid. Above 7 is alkaline. So blood is slightly alkaline, 7.35 to 7.45. Blood is normally at 38 degrees Celsius. Is that normal body temperature? The answer is no. Body temperature is 37 Celsius. See, the fact is, blood is really what carries your body temperature. Your true core temperature is 38 degrees Celsius. Problem is, when you do like an oral or an axillary temperature, the heat is having to diffuse up through all of that skin, all that adipose, and it loses a degree on the way. So your blood should be right around 38 degrees Celsius. It's maybe about 8% of your total body weight. And the average volume for males is 5 to 6 liters. For females, it's 4 to 5 liters. Notice the common number there in between. The average would be 5. That's the normal textbook number. So we say the normal person has 5 liters of blood. Now, is that true for everybody? No, of course not. You got little tiny, people that are 4 feet tall and weigh 100 pounds versus somebody like, Kevin Durant, who's whatever, 6'9", 265, 270. Yeah, big people have more blood. So it's an average. Average for a human is around 5 liters of blood. I want you to know that number. You absolutely have to know that number. 5 liters is the number I want you to know whenever I ask you how much blood there is in a typical human. 5 liters. Cyanosis versus carbon monoxide poisoning. Cyanosis means, cyan means blue. So people, here you can see this woman has cyanosis. Now you're thinking, wait, she's not blue. Well, her lips are bluer than they should be. Cyanosis is potentially a danger sign because it means the tissues are not getting enough blood. Like sometimes newborn babies will turn blue. That's when the alarms go off and people start sprinting down the hallways. Like little babies born with the so-called hole in their heart, we'll see that coming up. They may not be getting oxygenated blood to their tissues, and yeah, they'll start turning a bluish color, and that's serious. That's called cyanosis. Carbon monoxide is the opposite. Carbon monoxide actually displaces oxygen on hemoglobin, so you don't get the oxygen you're supposed to need, but it turns the hemoglobin bright red. So people who die of carbon monoxide poisoning look red. That's not a very good diagnostic tool, though, because they say cherry red, already dead. By the time you turn red, it's already too late. All right, after centrifuging, which of these will contain the components of immune function? That would be the buffy coat where the white blood cells are, okay? How much is blood worth? Well, interesting graph here. You see over on the far right, crude oil, and then bottled water. Did you realize that bottled water costs more per ounce of crude oil? Then comes Red Bull, then vodka. Now we're getting serious. And then penicillin. See, penicillin pretty damn expensive. But look at human blood. Human blood, per milliliter is actually very expensive. Although not nearly as expensive. One of the most valuable fluids on human Earth. HP black ink number 45, more valuable than gold. All right, let's look at some of the things that are in your plasma. Nutrients, all right? Blood brings nutrients to your tissues. Oxygen, glucose, amino acids, free fatty acids. Remember, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Free fatty acids are parts of fat, okay? The typical fat is a triglyceride, which has a glycerol head and 3 fatty acid tails. So once the fatty acid tails break off, they're now free fatty acids. That's not Future Farmers of America, which was very popular when I grew up in Nebraska. Most kids belonged to it. I didn't, but most kids did. Waste products. Main waste products in the blood, and you have to know these. You have to know both of these. You have to know the main nutrients. There you go. Oxygen, glucose, amino acids, free fatty acids. I'll ask you that on quizzes. And waste products, you absolutely must know these. CO2, that comes from aerobic respiration. Urea comes from the breakdown of nitrogenous wastes. It is a nitrogenous waste. It comes from the breakdown of nitrogenous compounds. So urea comes from the breakdown of proteins and amino acids because they have a nitrogen group on them, the NH2, the amino group. Lactic acid is a waste product from anaerobic fermentation, all right? So when you're trying to make ATP in the absence of oxygen, you create lactic acid as a byproduct. And then creatinine. In Bio 201, you learned about creatine. Remember, creatine was able to take a phosphate and stick it on from an ADP, and then stick it onto an ADP in order to make an ATP. So what happens when creatine breaks down, it becomes creatinine. Creatinine is a waste product in the blood that also turns out to be a great marker for various kinds of dysfunction. So we need to know those 4. CO2, urea, lactic acid, creatinine, and you should know where they come from as well. Others, Hormones, enzymes, transporters, electrolytes, gases, vitamins, other regulatory molecules. There is a lot of stuff in your blood. Lots of stuff. Many, many solutes. Now, in addition to what should be in the blood, let's talk about a couple things that should not be in the blood. Two big ones are myoglobin and glycogen. Let's look at glycogen first. Remember, glycogen is the stored form of glucose. You store it in your liver and you store it in your skeletal muscle. It should not ever be present in blood. Normally, the glycogen in the liver is converted back to glucose before being released into the bloodstream. So glycogen in the bloodstream is a sign of trouble. Then myoglobin. You may have heard of hemoglobin, which is what carries oxygen in your blood and makes your blood red. Well, myoglobin, and you should have heard of this in Bio 201, myoglobin is what holds oxygen in skeletal muscle tissue. It's also red, all right? So myoglobin and glycogen, again, yeah, you would find those in the liver. You'd find them in myoglobin in the skeletal muscles. Those should not be found in the blood. If they're found in the blood, that's trouble, especially myoglobin. Myoglobin in the blood is a serious issue. One situation which that would happen is something called rhabdomyolysis, where muscle injury will release glycogen and myoglobin into the bloodstream. What happens is the kidneys are filtering things out of your blood. They're filtering waste products like the ones we saw, like urea, like lactic acid, so on. The kidney is not ready to handle something the size of myoglobin. Myoglobin is way too big for the kidney to handle, and it actually will damage your kidneys. That's rhabdomyolysis. So this is a serious condition. Could cause overworking during a workout. That can cause rhabdomyolysis. Other situation we know about here locally is rattlesnake bite. What happens in a rattlesnake bite? Rattlesnake venom is very cytotoxic. It breaks down tissues and cells. So what happens is when you're bitten by a rattlesnake, the venom gets into your bloodstream, gets into your lymphatic first, and it makes its way into the blood, ends up trying to get filtered out in your kidney. But along the way, it's broken down some of your skeletal muscle. So now the skeletal muscle is full of myoglobin, and the myoglobin hits the kidneys, and the kidneys can't deal with it, and they start dumping it into the urine. That's why a lot of times after a rattlesnake bite, somebody will pee brown. What's happening is that's the myoglobin that's coming out. That's a sign of kidney damage, as your kidneys are desperately trying to handle all that myoglobin in the blood. So don't get bitten by rattlesnakes, okay? Bad idea.